if you are at all familiar with GSC OU, at least in its modern form, then you know that Golem is a great Pokemon, or at least that it gets used a lot. But it is a great Pokemon. It defines a significant piece of the metagame. It is, for example, the main reason, far and away, why Hidden Power Water actually sees usage sometimes. Zapdos, Raikou, yes, but also Gengar sometimes, which before Golem, was never something you would consider at all. But Golem is such an important piece of the metagame that HP Water is an actually good move. And you would think, oh, well, it can also do other things, right? Like Steelix and Rhydon. Like, yeah, but, hitting those for bigger damage is not nearly as big a deal as hitting Golem for such huge damage. And that is why before Golem, HP Water was very, very rare. So, before Golem is what we're going to explore at first, because Golem was not always, so highly ranked in the viability rankings, alongside tier staples like Skarmory, otherwise known as the Snorlax counter. And before anyone gets, particular about, well, Skarmory loses to, Fire Blast or Thunder. Like, yes, I know, but standard Snorlax, the EQ one that that beats literally everything else, Skarmory beats that. And then you pair it with a teammate that can handle the more elemental Snorlaxes. Anyway, so yeah, being ranked alongside Skarmory is a big, big deal. But it wasn't always like this. It's not like it's been a staple for pretty much all of GSC's existence, like, Nidoking or something. So, what was it like before Golem was ranked so highly in the viability rankings? Before you could go to the GSC OU sample teams, and these teams specifically chosen to illustrate the metagame. Like, okay, I see the Pokemon that are being used in those viability rankings. How do they come together on actual teams? Well, here are a lot of the team styles that the best players use, the most consistent team styles. This is a portrait of the metagame. This is what it looks like. And here they are as examples for you to try so you can learn the metagame. Look, you got a Golem offense team here. You got a Golem offense team here. You got a Golem offense team here. You got a Golem offense team here and here in the samples. So that's a lot of Golem in the samples, and that's just on offense. Because on stall, you can also use Golem. That's right, 3 Golem stall teams. Wow, Golem is amazing. What does it do? Well, in short, it rapid spins and has great defensive typing, and also potentially boom. That's the short version. But because I know sometimes I constantly, this Pokemon is good because it's fast and strong and it kills stuff. You could have ended the video there. Yeah, if I wanted to take all the nuance and... Sorry, I'm practicing my Zenness. Anyway, so before Golem was so highly ranked in the viability rankings and plastered all over the sample teams page, what was it like? Well, let's look at the old viability ranking thread for GSC. So the images are no longer functional. That's funny. So yeah, we got a very different tier list, but by and large, it's the same Pokemon, right, in the higher ranks. You're seeing Cloyster, Eggy, Fori, Gengar, Machamp. Miltank is ranked higher than it would be now, but yeah, so what? Big deal. Okay, so that's the A rank, and forget like the distinctions between A and B and C, because here in the modern one, then we have Golem in B1, but that's a big deal considering that's in the top 10. So in this old viability ranking thread, you see that Golem is not in the top 10. And you're getting past the staples of the tier. These are, in this old A rank, it's basically, the big guns after the, staples of Lax and the Electrics. All right, well, what else gets used? This rather small pool. And once you get to B rank, this is considered like the jankier stuff that can work, but isn't going to be used consistently. Like, yes, something like SD Tentacruel can be threatening on occasion, but it's certainly not going to be something you slap on a team over and over and over. Ditto something like Espeon. Although Espeon has proved more consistent in recent years, but that's something else. Rise of Espeon coming soon, maybe. Espeon and Alakazam. I should ask my buddy Tony Flygon to do that. He loves Espeon. He wins with it constantly. Anyway, so then we get to the C rank, and this is the stuff considered to be like real junk. You know, like not outright trash, but, and I mean, some of this is also like aged not so well, which is totally fine, by the way. Not an indictment of the past player base. Please don't hear me as saying that. It's just that sometimes we realize, oh, hey, Moltres is actually really good. Moltres is terrifying. It even was featured on the sample team. So that's one thing. And of course, Jinx, the thing that some people want to ban, that video already exists. If you have not seen, I have a video called The Rise of Jinx in GSC OU. And it is directly related because it rose at the same time as Golem, on the same teams as Golem, even. And we will get to that example later. But yeah, for the most part, like, this stuff is, like, very gimmicky. Like, you know, Entei, for example. Entei is not good, you know? Or, like, Meganium and Piloswine, like, they have use, but it's really, really limited. So for Golem to be, you know, ranked so lowly here is an example of where we were. I mean, you didn't even think about Golem at all. Like, this is the A rank of old. Like, this is the stuff you need to be thinking about on a regular basis. Of course, this is the metagame. Then the B rank is like, you know what? I better make sure that I don't randomly lose to, I don't know, Jolteon, you know, or something like that. It's like, that's something to consider, but not really. And by and large, the B rank Pokemon are B rank because you will kind of handle them without really thinking about it too much. You know, yes, something like Tentacruel subbing against your sleeping or paralyzed Zapdos trying to spam Thunder is going to be a nightmare. But, you know, by and large, you will be able to get around it for its other flaws, like its EQ weakness and bad defense and all that stuff. So, now let's paint a portrait of the metagame at this time, right? So, here we see a GSC team by Borat. This is not called, you know, Vaporeon offense or, you know, explosions plus Vaporeon or anything. It is just called GSC team because, no exaggeration, this was the GSC team. I cannot emphasize it enough. And Borat reached out to me recently and said he wanted to do a GSC video with me. And I sent him a PM on Smogan, like, hey, you know, totally, hit me up on Discord. But I don't know if he's been on the forums lately, so if he sees this, then please give me a shout, because I would love to do that video. Anyway, so the way that this team came into being, in short, is that, you know that stereotype about how GSC is all stall? A stereotype which is decidedly incorrect, by the way, and I also have a video on this. I forget its exact title, but it's called, like, why GSC offense is, like, better than you think, or why it's not all stall, something like that. So you can go check that one out too if you want a more in-depth picture of why GSC in its modern form is run over by offense more often than not, and why it's so powerful, and why defensive teams actually are the ones who need to keep up. Anyway, so in the really old times, like Net Battle and such, then stall teams were very dominant. And, you know, for the reasons you'd think, oh, well, you know, there's not that much firepower, and it's very easy to just wall everything with Scarm and friends, and, you know, Miltank will growl stall Snorlax and stuff like that. So then, basically, Borat made this team which takes... I don't want to say invented the idea of bait explosions, but really shook up the metagame by saying, oh, you want to switch your Zapdos into my Exeggutor? Okay, I will blow it up, and now my Vaporeon will sweep. So that was a real jolt to the GSC metagame system, because you've got a lot of explosions and a lot of Pokemon that are able to synergize really well, switch back and forth. They're both offensively and defensively capable, and that's important because being defensively capable is big, because in a gen like this where everything is so bulky, you need to bring more to your team than just offensive threat. You know, because even when you have your so-called big hitter on the field, then you are not necessarily going to be able to guarantee enormous damage on the opponent like you might in a more modern generation when you've got like a banded Urshifu with Wicked Blow or something, and like whatever switches into this is taking 1,000,000 damage. You know, that doesn't really exist so much. So you need, you know, in a newer generation you might forgive an Urshifu-like Pokemon. Oh, well, it's not very good defensively, but it hits so hard, I just need to get in the field and it'll be worth it. It's like, no, you need, if you're going to fight to get a Pokemon on the field, then it better be, you know, getting those 2 KOs, those OKOs on a majority of the metagame. GSC, that doesn't really happen. So you need to have a Pokemon that can switch into things more. So even these offensive teams are going to have staying potential. So basically, there's a lot of explosions here, to free up Zapdos and Vaporeon. You got Cloyster, Snorlax, Steelix. And Steelix we'll get to in a second because Steelix and Golem are very closely related. Yeah, and basically it opens up for a Vaporeon sweep. But it doesn't have to be Vaporeon. There's a million variations of this team. Machamp was an incredibly popular way to... an incredibly popular alternative. I think that was Mr. E's team that he spammed for a really long time. And then, there were variants with Gengar, because, spin blocking and another explosion. Talk about it facilitating a Zapdos sweep. Another Pokemon that can bait in and blow up Raikou. Or, you can use a Raikou of your own for even more pressure. What you can throw in something like, Nidoking. Jinx if you were being goofy, because back then being Jinx was being goofy. Or, experimental or whatever. So, this team style, if not this literal team, although it usually was this literal team, Vaporeon or Machamp was basically the same thing. It's like, the big five of Zapdos, Snorlax, Cloyster, Exeggutor, Steelix, plus your preferred last, usually Vaporeon or Machamp. And I think when SPL came around, Smogon Premier League, for those who don't know, it's the Smogon's biggest team tournament, and it's the one we're going to be exploring in this video, because alongside with the World Cup of Pokemon, that had old generations, it is where a lot of metagame innovation happens, because all the players are handpicked, they're supposed to be the best in their field, and that's why, since they are such specialists in the tier, then they're always trying to get an edge over their opponents, because they're making their own teams, and not just copy-pasting because they have to play it. No, they're choosing to play it, so they want to come up with something new and get an advantage over their opponents. So, I think around the time SPL came around, like 2010, and then the following few years, I think slowly Machamp started to eclipse Vaporeon as the most popular. Definitely in the mid-2010s, let's say. So, when I say this team was the metagame, I cannot overemphasize that. It is that... Sorry, I just noticed that the nicknames on this team are Scarlett Johansson with Eggy and Vaporeon, and Steelix and Zapdos are Blake Lively, and then Cloyster and Snorlax are Emma Watson. I never noticed that before. Anyway, I guess this was before Ana de Armas was really big, so I can forgive that. Anyway, so when I say that this team was everywhere, it was everywhere. It was copied by pretty much everyone, especially as a lot of the older GSC player base, the current gen guys, or the guys who came in later but started playing it during Gen 3 or whatever, the dedicated player base, started to fade away, they got older. Because, if you were playing GSC when it was, a more modern generation, then you were up there in age. And so, you're like, oh yeah, SPL, not really for me anymore. So, if you were still around at all. Although some did, of course, and they played very well, but that's beside the point. Point is that you have a player base that is newer to GSC, and when they're learning, they're not going to say, oh, well, I remember back in 04 when, this kind of SD Tentacruel stall team was popular. That's a real thing. I didn't just make that up. Then, I don't remember if 04 was exactly it. It might have been 02 or 03. But that I do remember reading about SD Tentacruel stall teams being quite popular. I think it might have been when Celebi was legal. That might have, which it was for a time. So, point being, you've got these new players coming in, and they're learning GSC, and they learn GSC with this team. Because the old GSC was very, very stall-based, and the new GSC, this team was specifically designed to take advantage of those stall teams. Bait explosions, spikes pressure, switch back and forth, double switch spikes, that kind of thing, and then clean up with your sweeper at the end of the game. And they did very well against these old stall teams. And as a result, these teams are so good and so popular that they become the new metagame. So a lot of matchups, even in tournament play, wind up being these two teams, or these two teams' styles crashing into each other. It got to the point in early 2015, I think, or around then people were complaining about GSC offense being too good, much like some do now, actually. And players were wondering, look, Zapdos is too good, maybe we gotta, ban Hidden Power Electrics, as was done a long, long time ago, so ground types can actually be good counters to them. Some players were talking about Ho-Oh and Celebi dropping, or Celebi, I guess, because they wanted the game to be slower. It was too fast. It was just stuff exploding every other turn, which GSC was considered for a long time. I don't know if it still is. I think it is, but it was considered for the most time the most precise, chess-like, skillful metagame. And when everything just starts blowing up, then that's not really... it becomes a lot more volatile than what is prized in GSC. Now, you could make the argument, of course, that, it's, just the way players are playing, not necessarily the game. Because I see that in, DPP, for example, when someone says, pair spam ruins the game. It's like, pair spam isn't necessarily even that good. It's just that players try to dumb the game down for themselves and make it easier. And sometimes Pokemon does reward stupid stuff. That's, unfortunately, the game. So... that nothing really came of that debate tiering-wise, but it did lead to some players looking for, how can we mix this up a little bit? And one of those changes that eventually came to rip teams like this apart were Jinx. But another problem was that teams like this really did not care for dealing with spikes themselves, mostly because of the power of Zapdos. Because if you'll look at this team, you'll notice that Zapdos is kind of... it's checked by Snorlax, which can Rest Talk, doesn't have to be Rest Talk. But... yeah, if it's not Rest Talk Snorlax, then, Spikes plus Thunder is putting a lot of pressure on it. And Eggy is not really good. Obviously, Cloyster gets destroyed. And Vaporeon or Machamp, whatever it is, they don't really do well against it. And obviously Zapdos wars are stupid. And then we get to, of course, Steelix. And Steelix was a Pokemon that a lot of players started to take issue with. Because... in terms of a Zapdos check, it's good because of its typing, immune to Thunder, not neutral to HP Ice, of course. But the only way it actually ever damages Zapdos is by exploding, which is an incredibly unreliable strategy for a Pokemon you are going to be facing every single game. And roaring it out doesn't even make it take Spikes damage because Zapdos is broken. I think I have a video on that too, why Zapdos is just as good as Snorlax in GSC. That's one of my hotter takes, I guess. But just as good, I do encourage you to watch that video for my reasoning, but just as good in terms of it should be on every team, not as in it is as broken as Snorlax. Although, on some days. Anyway, so when you're dealing with broken Zapdos and your solution is to get worn down by spikes repeatedly and roar it out and then hope maybe you boom it, then that can very quickly get taken advantage of. Furthermore, Steelix is often a liability against defensive teams because, yes, you do often have that thing where you can curse up and then blow up Skarmory because phasing goes second. The second phaser wins in GSC. If I have a Steelix and it's slower than Skarmory and both of us use phasing moves, then Skarmory's first phase fails and Steelix's roar wins. It's the opposite of every generation afterwards. Yeah, the problem with Steelix against Stall is that it lets in Fortress a lot, and it's not really doing that much pressure. It's not exerting that much pressure until it's ready to go for that boom. And the problem is, you need Steelix to perform offensively and defensively, but it only performs offensively when it's ready to boom, and it doesn't really perform defensively once it's boomed. So let's say I want to remove Skarmory, but Steelix is also my Snorlax answer, and players are like, yeah, and we're also getting worn down by spikes. So Steelix basically does a bad job, in my opinion anyway. I think it's a decent Pokemon, but in my opinion, Steelix requires Gengar to not get immediately, irrevocably destroyed by Fortress, especially if Cloyster gets worn down, which, it often will. And I think it's just fighting an unnecessarily uphill battle. So basically, when defensive teams, bulky teams, adapt to this kind of explosion plan, and you're not catching them off guard as much, not to say that you can't win, but it's a lot more difficult, and these defensive teams are way more built to last than these offensive teams. So when you've got a Steelix that you need defensively because it takes on Snorlax, but you also need to blow it up on the Skarmory in order to actually get anywhere, then and you're also dealing with electrics and everything's getting worn down by spikes, it can get very ugly for offense versus stall sometimes. Now, it can go either way, of course, depending on how both players play. But basically, a lot of players started not being in love with Steelix. Although it was the default, and you're thinking, okay, well, if Steelix sucks so much, why not use something else? Well, the reason Steelix exists in this slot is that if you've got a GSC team, most of the time, I'm for the purposes of this, for newer players, I'm just going to say you need a phaser that resists normal. And the reason is that if you are not going to out-offense curse Snorlax, right? It just unless you blow up half your team to do it, and in which case, Snorlax says thank you, and my teammates will finish you off easily. So you will need to pretty much weaken it into resting range, right? And then yes, you can also have Machamp to threaten it, but it's Sleep Talk to Double Edge, and now your Machamp is destroyed. Or not destroyed, but potentially, but it's taking big damage either way, and you're not exactly threatening Okos on the opposing team in return. So you need to be able to force Snorlax to rest and then phase it out. So then, with Spike's pressure and the fact that it has to wake up, then you will be able to exert your offensive plan afterwards. Right? It's very systematic, very prolonged. I shouldn't say very prolonged. But it's not as automatic as in a newer generation with more firepower. So you do need that phase, and you do want that phaser to be normal resistant, because let's say that you have Zapdos as your phaser, and you're like, okay, I forced it to rest, and Snorlax used Sleep Talk and obliterated your Zapdos with a curse-boosted Double Edge, and then you lose. So you have to have that normal resistant phaser so that you can phase it out without getting obliterated by a Sleep Talk boosted Double Edge, or boosted Double Edge while it's asleep. There are some exceptions to this. Like if you can blank the Mono Lax with a Gengar, then you can use a non-normal resistant phaser, like Nidoking or Zapdos. They come to mind. But those are only for very specific teams that play very aggressively and used by players who are really familiar with the game plan. So by and large, you are going to use a normal resistant phaser. So your options are, defensive teams will use Skarmory anyway because they are not exerting offensive pressure, and so they need to play the long game against Snorlax, and therefore they will have Skarmory. And there are some Skarmory sets that don't phase, and instead they will just sit on the Snorlax forever. But, by and large, it will be Skarmory there. And for offensive teams that are more aggressive, then you don't want to run Skarmory because it brings your offensive momentum to a screeching halt. So what you'll do instead is run one of Rhydon, Tyranitar, or Steelix. Now, the reason Steelix is the most popular is because it has that aforementioned ability to check electrics as well. And being able to compress that into one slot is really, really good for team building purposes, because as opposed to, here's my Snorlax check and then my electric check somewhere else, especially because the checks to electrics are so few, because they are also very, very difficult to deal with. So Rhydon is better than Tyranitar as an electric check in a nutshell, because it's at least immune to Thunder, but even HP Ices hit it super effectively and quite hard. Although it can work, again, depends on what you surround it with. But yeah, Tyranitar can't even switch into Thunder, so more than once, which effectively means, the electric switches out and now you lose. So you have to pair it with another ground type, like Tyranitar and Nidoking is a very popular pairing for this reason. So with that in mind, then Steelix gets used because it compresses that electric and Snorlax check, and of course the offensive pressure of cursing up to 999 attack, which is the max in this gen, and then blowing up Skarmory and then enabling Snorlax. But as we already just mentioned, the many flaws of Steelix. So while it is very popular, players were looking for an alternative to all its problems that we just mentioned, and I'm forcing myself to not repeat. So, the first SPL that we have usage statistics for, because all the games were public, is 2014, or SPL 5, and this also gives us another picture of the metagame. You will notice the top 5, Snorlax, Cloyster, Zapdos, Exeggutor in top 4. Exeggutor used to be ranked really highly. And yeah, that was because these kinds of teams are very popular. Steelix is surprisingly low usage. But look at how high Vaporeon usage is. I think it's nowhere near that high nowadays. And so it's generally a very offensive metagame. Like, you don't really see the stall Pokemon. Miltank was used weirdly. But by and large, Skarmory is the only true defense-only staple in the top 10. Snorlax obviously is on every team. That 90% is misleading. That's because actually someone might have used a Laxless team, and no, I think some people did use Laxless teams once their teams were eliminated and they were just using junk. So that kind of skews it a little bit. Or I assume some people might have won without revealing their Snorlax. That's another thing that sometimes happens. It's like in RBY when someone wins without revealing Tauros, and it makes Tauros not have 100% usage. But yeah, there's lots of usage, offensively minded stuff here. I guess a Starmie it was more defensively minded than it is now. So let me revise that statement. It's not just Skarmory being defensively used in the top 10, but I mean Machamp being as high as it is, and Exeggutor. My God, Exeggutor was not used on defense at all. So yeah, you've generally got a very offensively leading metagame, and Steelix is a part of these. But Tyranitar used a lot as well, which I think that might have already been the beginning of, yeah, we don't like Steelix that much, and T-Tar is good. And then in subsequent years, then you would have similar usage statistics. So what's interesting about this is that we do see some Golem usage here already. 4 uses, so 4% total. Yeah, but the thing is, like, people knew Golem existed back then, but again, it was considered like a lesser Pokemon, like ranked among the Meganiums of the world. The stuff that, it can work sometimes. Far from elite. So far from a metagame staple, and I have found the biggest battle that Golem was featured in here between Jorgen and Carrot. Jorgen was the GSC player of the moment. He had an amazing performance in the previous SPL, helping lead his team to victory. And yeah, he uses Golem on a team here alongside Skarmory, and yeah, as I remember, it switches in on Fire Blast Snorlax. Yeah, and it gets a spin-off, and that's what Golem does, Rapid Spin. So you're thinking, all right, that's interesting. But yeah, then Carrot won the game, played very well. And there's actually Steelix doing... there's that exact mechanic. Skarmory Whirlwinds first, it fails, and then there's the Steelix going second and succeeding with the Roar. And yes, Kev is me. Because I was on Carrot's team, so he was naming them, all his Pokemon, after us. Isn't that adorable? Anyway, yeah, and then Golem pops up at the end of the game, and yeah, there are people wondering, because this was before Golem was like so widespread, so they're like, what? Golem gets Rapid Spin? Yeah, and then I think it's the last Pokemon to get fainted, yeah. Yeah, and people are like, yeah, when does Golem get Rapid Spin? It's like literally only GSC. Would have been very different if it had maintained Spin into Gen 3 and beyond. So, the next stage of Golem's development is not just people realizing it used Rapid Spin, but also a Roar. Now, before Roar, people would just think of Golem as, it gets Fire Blast. That's cool. You can hit Exeggutor and Fortress and EQ, and like people are thinking like, HP Rock, because it has to hit Zapdos, and Rock Slide and Rapid Spin are illegal together. So sometimes people didn't even think of Rapid Spin as a move you would use on it. It's like, let me just use Rock Slide. Who cares about Rapid Spin? So like EQ, Rock Slide, Fire Blast, Boom was like an actual set people used. And if they did spin with it, then they would throw in HP Rock or Fire Blast in the last slot. For the record, I still think Fire Blast Spin Golem is a very good Pokemon, but more on that later. And speaking of later, I will see you in like a minute or something because it's time for my bathroom break because I am very hydrated. All right, so we just mentioned Golem, HP Rock, Fire Blast, not really using Roar. So the first usage of Roar Golem that I can remember is this battle between Earthworm and Beckons, about a year from the previous log. So remember, these usage statistics we were looking at, they are from 2014, and the battle between Jorgen and Carrot with the spinning golem. As just one example, there were 3 other golems, but I don't remember them making much of an impact. And I think this was the highest stakes battle of the season with Golem. So March 2014. So this battle between Earthworm and Beckons, June 2015 for the World Cup. And this has a similar dynamic to Smoke and Premier League because it's a team tournament, very high stakes, people are very invested. And so the players who are in their respective tiers, they will try very hard to innovate. So Beckons is a very old school player. He's excellent. And he was also very innovative. And he did not just bring Golem, but he used Golem with Roar. And here you see, I know it's a log, bear with me. So here you see, turn 18, Beckons switches into Golem against Snorlax. Snorlax uses Curse, and then on the next turn, Earthworm switches out. But it doesn't matter, because the whole point is that Golem switched into Snorlax to use Roar. That is the... And you also see this funny comment from the guy named Andy Murray, whoever that was, just being amazed by Golem. Yeah. So, Issa here, curses removed. So I was like, oh, that's a little jolt. That's not really something that was used. And my little gift to you is that if you would like to hear me at age 19 narrating this battle, you don't have to read it in log form. I will provide the log and the link to all of these things we're using in the video in the pinned comment. But I will also provide the YouTube video version because I did record this live, in fact, because, Pokemon Online, so you do not have to suffer through the text version if you don't want. And, look at, I forgot the Golem. Look at it, this is how unstandard, look at this unusual document of Golem's non-standardness. I forgot it had Roar when I mentioned the threat of Fire Blast. You know, I haven't re-listened to the narration or anything, but the whole thing is that it, Golem will, when you're looking at Golem in this context, it's like, oh, well, what do people usually think of Golem doing? Oh, well, I guess it Fire Blasts. It can Rock Slide, with Fire Blast. It threatens out Skarmory and explodes, so that's pretty cool. You're not switching out their normal resistance to it. That is a real thing, by the way. We'll get to that. But, you're not even thinking of Roar. So even though it was used, it just completely slipped my mind because it was so foreign. So, Golem here was roaring. And I don't know. I don't think it didn't have an opportunity to spin because Earthworm's team didn't have spikes. Oh, but I don't think that it had... Yeah, here it is Rock Slide. So it might not have even had spin. I don't even remember what Beckons' team was. But, Golem used Rock Slide here. So this is Zapdos answer. So it's not going to be... I mean, unless it was EQ, Rock Slide, Rapid Spin, Roar, but somehow I don't see that happening. And also in this one, Golem is the last Pokemon to bite the dirt. That's sad. Let's see what what Beckons' team was. He's got an Exeggutor. Wow, that's a very modern team. Yeah, okay, so I think it was just going to, yeah, let me, because Jorgen's team, actually, we should look at as well. He just went between, I saw a Skarmory, so Snorlax, Vaporeon, Skarmory, Golem, Thief Skarmory, to catch the electrics, next, Raikou. Yeah, so this is not the kind of modern Golem-style team you will see. It's going to be more, more like Beckons is. Skarmory, Golem. What am I missing? Skarm, Golem, Raikou, Vaporeon, Snorlax. Strange. Oh, it's even Hydro Vaporeon. Nice. That's something you don't see as much now. Skarm, Raikou. Oh, Eggy, yeah, that's what I was missing. Okay, so yes, Jorgen's team of, nope, wrong replay. Jorgen's team of Skarm, Raikou, Vaporeon, Eggy, yeah, Spikeless, wow. Yeah, so that is very unlike, you don't see Golem on Spikeless teams. Spikeless teams in general in GSC are rare, and if you ask a couple of top players, then they think Spike should just be on every team. There's no real benefit to be gained from not using a Spikes Pokemon on your team. Like, what are you gonna do instead? And I happen to agree with that point of view personally. But yeah, Beckons' team is more modern. You know, you got the whole Lax, Zap, Cloyster, Gengar, Golem thing, and then your last can be whatever it wants: Jinx, Machamp, Raikou, Eggy, as it is in this case. But he's not using Golem's capacity to Rapid Spin. I mean, unless no. Okay, let's be real. He's running an offensive explosion team. He is not going to run EQ, Rock Slide, Roar, Rapid Spin Golem. It was used because I don't know why it was used over Snorlax and that or Steelix. I guess no, yeah, it's like a Rhydon that can explode in that case. Yeah. It can actually hit Zap. See, I think that was probably it though, because Steelix is just gonna sit in front of Zapdos and go, oh well, I can't actually KO anything. Or it can't actually do a single % of damage to the thing. And even like the occasional Body Slam or Dragon Breath Steelix used to spread paralysis, even those aren't going to actually meaningfully threaten it. I mean, they'll KO it from 1 HP, but still. So, without blowing up anyway, whereas Golem with Rock Slide actually threatens it. So, yeah, but still not spin. But there is the first use of Roar Golem. So, and then here, but this was not really enough to jumpstart it. Although people were trying to use Golem more. Here's a World Cup Finals game from August 2016 between IFM, aka Idiot from Mars, and Hodor, and he switches Golem into Snorlax, but he's not roaring. It's just EQing, trying to bring it down. It gets a nice, nasty crit and then blows up. But yeah, there's I think if you had Roar on that Golem, it would have been just fine. But yeah, there's funnily enough, IFM's team here is a standard nowadays, because I think his last is Heracross. Yeah, it is. This is this is one of the sample teams actually. IFM's team. I think you would put Roar on the Golem now, of course. But yeah, that's a yeah. So as you see, Golem's not really taking off. Now, the next the part where Golem does start taking off is here, and please forgive me because I am going to talk about myself now, and because I was involved in Golem's popularization, so I apologize. So, This is an SPL game I had against Mr. 378, great GSC player, and you'll see my team here is the original plan was to use Jinx and to use like a standard offense team, like with whatchamacallit, a standard offense team, but with Jinx. So you've got that whole thing, but if you just take see, like, it's little tweaks. Like, you change the Jinx here for Vaporeon or Machamp, you have the most standard team in the world. If you've originally got a Steelix. Like, the original team had a Steelix, right? That was the whole point. It was just, standard offense, but with a Jinx to get an edge on opposing offense teams, right? And I won't elaborate on the Jinx pick anymore because, again, Rise of Jinx and GSC video is for that. And as you see, 378's team here. 378's team here, I think, was built by Ojama, and it has a lot of offensive firepower, but you'll notice the lack of normal resist. And that is really important, not just because it blocks, and it's the reason why Steelix is so spammed on these teams. I understand where Ojama was coming with I don't want to use Steelix, this thing's a piece of garbage. Let me just, throw both Machamp and Vaporeon on the team. Right? Because otherwise, you see, Snorlax, Zapdos, Eggy, Cloyster, and then one of Vaporeon and Machamp, why not use both? I mean, it is an ambitious team, but it can definitely get the job done. The problem is the lack of normal resist, which means, of course, Explosion is an automatic KO, but more importantly, it means switching into Snorlax is a pain. And you might think, oh, well, what about Gengar in that slot? Like, theoretically, you could Gengar plus, like, Roar Zapdos or something, but most of the time, you would need Gengar plus, Roar, or else Curse EQ Snorlax just curses on you forever and wins, You can't even reliably send Machamp into it. And, I mean, yeah, so, theoretically, even Curse Talk could make something ugly happen once it starts struggling, but that's advanced tactics, so... Yeah, but that is why you normally see Steelix there. So I remember I was testing this kind of thing with my buddy Case, who was helping me get into GSC. He was throwing ideas at me. And I was like, hey, is it time to use Jinx? And he was like, yeah, I think this would be a good time to use Jinx. We were testing it with Steelix, and I was like, dude, Steelix is such a piece of garbage. Like, if Fortress shows up, I'm just toast. Which is oversimplifying it, of course, and you could get around that by using Steelix, Jinx, Gengar, with Gengar in the place now occupied by Exeggutor. But yeah, I really like Exeggutor there. So I was looking like what else can be done. What are my other normal resist options? Because look, you can't go T-Tar there because T-Tar does not resist Thunder. You can't go Rhydon there. I mean, you could, but this kind of team does not have the kind of prolonged play style that Rhydon fits on. Rhydon likes it when it can slow the game down and curse and roar, and it especially shines when it's paired with things like Machamp that let it pile on physically offensive bombardments at the opponent. So it really does not fit here. So I was like, okay, what about Golem? Hey, Golem can roar. And another important thing is that my Snorlax does not have rest. So Rhydon does not fit on the Bam 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 playstyle here, especially because it's so specially oriented with the Exeggutor Jinx combo. Another thing is here that my Snorlax does not have rest. It is 4 attacks, Double Edge Thunder, Self-Destruct, EQ, and I mean, there are all sorts of good non-rest Snorlax sets. Snorlax would generally have rest or Self-Destruct. But, it could have just been Fear's Snorlax, which he had not debuted yet, I don't think. But Lovely Kiss, Double Edge, EQ, boom. Something like that would have been fine. It would have clashed with Jinx, but, there's all kinds. It could have been Fire Blast over Thunder or something like that. So, the thing to remember here is that with Snorlax not resting, then you need to really help against Zapdos. Public enemy number 1 here. Because you've got all the pressure in the world for other Lax, but other Zapdos, that's nightmarish. And the whole Steelix thing gets worn down, it's to boom too quickly. The same exact problems as people using the Borat team were having. Exeggutor helps for sure, but what if, because it's got Stun Spore and it can boom, all that stuff, but what if, that slot could actually do something to Zapdos rather than switch in, take spikes, take an HP Ice, and roar it out? And not have to open yourself up to curse, or to that dilemma where you curse and then you blow up your Steelix and then you struggle against Snorlax. Not to say it can't work, but it is a really fine line to tread. And is made even more difficult when your last is Jinx, and therefore doesn't have some like the muscle of like Machamp or even a Vaporeon, which can go toe-to-toe with Snorlax. Jinx, not so much. So that is where Golem came from. Like, hey, what if this thing is the Rapid Spinner because it can actually, or the normal resist Phaser, because it can roar, it can boom, and yes, it takes HP Ice, but it also Rapid Spins. So the idea is not use Golem as a hardcore Zapdos counter, because a little thread that you might have been following along to this point is that there's not a lot of Zapdos checks that you can fit onto a team. So when you run offense, you do have to be very, very aware of this kind of thing. And so the basic idea is and offense teams don't like dealing with spikes in general. So Golem here, instead of Steelix, frees up the team to not worry about spikes that much in general, so that gives the Eggy and the Jinx and the 4-attack Snorlax a lot more leeway in switching in and repeatedly bashing away at the opponent, because even if it doesn't remove the spikes permanently, it doesn't have to, it relieves pressure in some sort and extends that timer that you're on in order to break through the stall team before it just exhausts all of your options. Before it lets you wear yourself out. It lets you pressure them for longer. When the timer is more, how long do I have to withstand these offensive threats coming at me, as opposed to how long do I have before I run out of steam and can't break through the opposing team anymore. It completely shifts the dynamic of the game. So Rapid Spin there is very important. And in terms of dealing with Zapdos on offensive teams, it's a lot of Zapdos' threat comes from spikes, punishing everything that switches into it. There are no spikes immune answers to Zapdos. So it does make a big difference when you're not taking 12.5 switching in. Even if, it's only 6.25 after lefties, but, it does make a big difference. So with Golem being able to Rapid Spin and Boom, and it helps out Snorlax, and it helps out Exeggutor, it even helps out Jinx. Because Jinx can potentially tango with Zapdos a lot better if it's not, having its health sliced even just a little bit, because it is a game of percentages and every single one counts. So obviously you can also run a different Snorlax set here, but I wanted 4-attack Thunder to lure in and remove Cloyster, because that's another really nice piece of synergy here, is that Thunder Snorlax lures in, destroys Cloyster, and then Golem freely Rapid Spins, and that's it. Spikes permanently off the field. And Golem is a great Rapid Spinner because the tier's Ghosts, Gengar and Misdreavus, do not want to switch into it because Gengar is O-code by EQ and Misdreavus does not exactly take it well either, because remember, no abilities this gen, no Levitate. And it doesn't take it well either, and it doesn't really hurt Golem back very much in return. And Golem does get a lot of opportunities considering it switches into Snorlax, and can help against electrics, and it can take hits from all sorts of things, like it can pivot, it can withstand, if you have to withstand an EQ from Nidoking to get the spin-off, so be it. You have a good matchup against most T-Tars, and things like Steelix one-on-one, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it gives you, and also, in one-on-one against Snorlax, Golem also has a much stronger Earthquake than Steelix does. Steelix's unboosted Earthquake does pittance to pretty much everything, whereas Golem's EQ, it's not shattering things, but it actually hits quite decently, so that helps. So that's the basic idea. Spin relieves Spike's pressure, makes it easier to switch around, and it still has a good boom. Because non-Skarmory normal resists don't like switching into it, and if there is a Skarmory, then I don't mind slowing the game down. Skarmory just means I got the Rapid Spin off. So that's why, and all these things I'm describing, this is why Golem is so great, and I think this is when more players started to appreciate, like, hey, this thing is really good if you spin and roar with it. So, but it wasn't just this game and then suddenly, oh my god, it's a genius. Golem must be used on every team. Not at all. It actually took a while to take off, because there was another Golem used this SPL after this game, and it was not Rapid Spin or Roar. It might have had one of those moves, but the only move that it uses in this game is actually Fire Blast. Well, I'm going to guess that maybe it didn't stay in on Zapdos there because it didn't have Rapid Spin and didn't want to blow up or something. I don't know. Or maybe it just wanted to check for HP water, but yeah, here we have, IFM here. You see, like, look, is Zapdos, Steelix, Cloyster, Snorlax, Exeggutor, Machamp, the most standard. That was IFM's go-to. So, then a bunch of stuff happens. And, yeah, so Golem misses Fire Blast on the Steelix here, and that's pretty much the only thing it does. And then it Fire Blasts the Eggy switch, but it's not spinning, so I'm going to guess maybe not. Yeah, so we do see a cool combo of Golem and T-Tar here, which I think is very good, but, you know, explain that later. So, that game against Mr. 378 was February 26, 2017, and this game between Bomber and Hodor is March 11th, 2017. But yeah, all those reasons why Golem was used and what was discovered, like, hey, this thing basically helps deal with Zapdos not by countering Zapdos in a nutshell, but because by removing spikes, you take away so much of its pressure. Like, Zapdos muscles its way through pretty much everything with spikes down, but without spikes, then it's a lot easier. Like, spamming Thunder against Snorlax with spikes down with Zapdos is very reasonable. Without spikes, you're mostly just wasting Thunder PP. You know, so, and it becomes a lot more feasible to pivot around it. You know, because it's, with Steelix, for example, you would take those hits and then curse up or something, you would switch out, and you're not getting your health back because you're taking spikes when you come back in. With Golem, yeah, you might take a hard HP Ice for now, but, you know, you're still taking under 50%, first of all. And second of all, you are getting that health back. You know, obviously, a lot of it relies on how well you manage the spikes game, but, you know, if you incapacitate Cloyster early on, which, you know, Cloyster switches into Snorlax, so you have no shortage of tools for doing that, or even if you just Toxic Cloyster with your own Cloy or your Fori or something, you know, then every time Cloyster switches in to reset those spikes, it's taking poison damage, so it's not doing it forever. Obviously, you know, in a nutshell, Cloyster does switch into Golem to relay the spike, but then again, that's also good, because if you are forcing it to spike again, you are forcing the Cloyster to not use Explosion. Not just because it has to relay the spike, but because if it ever blows up on something, it better, you know, get a lot out of that boom, or, you know, then the spikes will permanently be off, and, you know, then where will you be? You know, spikes is a lot of the offensive pressure in Gen 2. So, let's fast forward to the following SPL. This is January 7th, 2018, Fear against Hodor, and he's got a Curse Snorlax, and there's another Golem, and what he's got here, I think IFM is actually not using a Spikes team, unusually, so I don't know that we're going to see Golem get its rapid spin off here. But you see Golem, you know that sample team at the beginning? Yeah, this is that sample team in action. I don't think he revealed... Oh, well, there's a Spikes, yeah. And this Snorlax rests, of course, which is more common. But, yeah, yeah, I think the last was Jinx. Yeah, and then people were inspired by seeing Fear. It's like, hey, look, that team of his looks, you know, pretty nasty, actually. I kind of like what it was doing. I think it might have been spread around or something. But yeah, people are like, yeah, this is pretty cool. Then, of course, there was a brief... You know what? There's always that thing when something pops up in an old gen. It's like, oh, is this actually good, or is it a gimmick? You know, so here we've got Markop, who is using... I think it might have just been Fear's team, because it's got the... Oh, no, it might not have been... Jinx here because it's got Lovely Kiss Snorlax. I'm not sure. There's lots of variations. It could have been a million things. But I do know that that team is Fierce. So you might not have Lovely Kiss Snorlax interfering with Jinx. Although, you know, with Sleep Talkers absorbing them and, you know, resting, that it might... I am not opposed to the existence of two Sleep moves on the same team. So who knows? But yeah, here's, look, Poison Cloyster switching into Golem. And yeah, it'll switch out now, but now Cloyster's taking more poison damage to switch in and relay the spikes, so you can see how this goes well. So now, here's the turn, where Markov makes a double back to Golem to get that one-on-one against T-Tar. It looks like he's doing great, and the T-Tar pulls out Surf, and the Golem dies. And that is Golem's real flaw, that you have to... When Golem is popular, as it is, you have to be really careful of water coverage. Now, Surf is not something you just haphazardly throw on T-Tar, of course. And you can't just throw HP Water on the Electrics or Gengar, you know, willy-nilly. But it is something you have to be considerate of, but it's also not very hard to be considerate of, and Golem is so good that it still manages to be successful in spite of this. However... because Pokemon players can sometimes be a little results-based, or a lot results-based, and a lot unfair in their judgment. They saw that surf and were like, okay, Golem is officially over. It was a nice little gimmick, but, goodbye. No one is going to take this seriously anymore. See, all it takes is one little water coverage and da-da-da-da-da. And, yeah. So, that was, I thought was, fairly unfair. But, yeah, this style of GSC offense, I think, once Fear, brought it back and was like, yeah, this is good, then, yeah, I think maybe, like, even in this game, like, when the T-Tar's the one-on-one against the Golem, like, because it was switching into a Zapdos, so you're thinking, why is T-Tar coming in against Zapdos if you have a Raikou, unless you wanted to catch the Golem switching in, and EQ, that's not enough of a reason, So at that point you start thinking, okay, maybe something's up here. So that's exactly what I mean. You think, could this have water? Could this reasonably have water? And there was a lot of information pointing to it. So, even this like unexpected Surf Tar thing had a lot of basis for, checking for it. Like, if T-Tar's going to switch into a Thunder because, it thinks that Golem might come in, so it's trying to catch, both, but mostly the Golem. Maybe it's trying to lure my Golem into something. Especially because the Cloyster is poisoned, so, he's got to do something about it. Yeah, so that was absolutely... so you see the point I'm making. But, then for a while you're like, oh, well, no more Golems, I guess. And here we've got... apparently Jimmy's T-Tar was Curse Rest here to act as his Fire Lax check. Anyway, so I'm sorry, but it's me again. I do really apologize for this. But then I was playing Mr. 378 in the World Cup of Pokemon, June 2018, and I wanted to take a similar strategy to the year before. I was making, some teams, and I wound up using something... This Snorlax is Curse Rest, Curse Body Slam Rest, because I wanted to spread paralysis. But instead of Exeggutor, it's a Snorlax lead, of course, and then there's a Gengar instead of the Exeggutor. Taking a similar path to the ones that... this was a double-edged Curse Fire. I was trying to do something else. But basically the same, like, the template of, first the team I've got against 378, then, Fear team and Markop variation of it, or his team. Then, and you get what I'm getting at. It's this kind of updating of the classic Borat formula into a more spin-focused team. Because here, if you've got the Curse Paraspreading Snorlax, then you are a lot less vulnerable to counterattacks when you are spinning for it. And because you could even say, oh, well, you could have an all-out attacking Lax, one that explodes and doesn't rest, but you wouldn't want to lead with it, probably. So if you're going to lead with it, you're going to run, Curse Rest, and then that's where Rapid Spin comes from. You take the spin, you take the HP Ice with Golem, and then you remove all that pressure, and yeah, especially because Curse Body Slam forces the issue against offense very well. And, yeah, that's basically the idea. If you paralyze Cloyster, then it's just as effective as, or similarly effective to forcing the issue with spin, because Cloyster switches in on Golem spin, and then it can threaten to boom on you. It doesn't have to, of course, but you have options. So I forget how... Oh, in this game, because I don't think we watched it, then we're just going to skip ahead, because a bunch of stuff happens. Double Edge, Cloyster, Eggy sleeps it, and then Stunsport, I think both of our Eggies get boomed. HP Fire... Yeah, boom. Zapdos into Lax, because very aggressive double-edge spam. See, when Machamp switches in, it doesn't take very much, and then... this is just an illustration of stuff being used earlier. So there's the DE, the Cloyster gets... Oh, sorry, I skipped across it. The Cloyster is found. It takes another double-edge, but Thunder, and that's basically the idea. So now, if I get that spin-off and the last isn't Gengar, then... Yeah, so Machamp... Rock Slide, fine. Zapdos is broken. See, force the rest. See, there's the Curse, and now Golem comes in on the forced rest, and it will spin, and it will roar. And that is so much utility. I think a lot of... something else I wanted to mention earlier, but it just came back to me, was that a lot of players used to kind of underrate the effectiveness of spin in multiple generations, not just GSC, but they were like, why would you spin on an offensive team? Just, hit the opponent hard. That's what led to things like Life Orb 3-attack Starmie and DPP, which slowly died out once people realized, oh yeah, spin is really good, even on offense, because it gives you more opportunity for it. So, yeah, there's... That's the idea. That this was coinciding with the time where people were starting to appreciate, spin more and more. I mean, this was around the time people couldn't make teams without Starmie and TPP. Oh, you see the reaction here from M Dragon going, Golem. I don't know where that came from, but I'm glad he appreciated it. And then Funkasaurus calling it a meme. Because, see, that's what I'm talking about. People thought Golem was a meme. It was just like, all right, what are you doing with this? And I also know that meme is just, the nickname I have for it with Z turned to an M. But yeah, and then Golem does exactly this. Like here, if Steelix switches it, not to rag on Steelix too much, although I do have half a mind to make a video called Why Steelix Sucks in GSC. But then again, this video kind of is that. Yeah, if it came in here, then it's still getting affected by spikes, and it would only pretty much roar it out, and with the Vaporeon last, because here it can he makes a great move thundering, but it's actually a roll to hit two thunders to a KO Jinx with two thunders. So even that, like, if you switch Jinx into two thunders with spikes up, obviously gets to a KO, but without, it becomes a roll. I get very lucky here with that dodge and doing 66.6% and freezing. But yeah, the point is to sack Jinx at this point to get Snorlax in for free again, because Lax is free and there's no double edge resist. So yeah, see here, look, even Golem, with Steelix, then yes, it's got higher defense and all, but it's also getting worn down by spikes. So yeah, you can take that +1 EQ if the trade-off is, not having to deal with spikes. So then Vaporeon last, Snorlax, and I think it just blows up, and then Zapdos wins. So yeah, Golem, that was Golem's first, and then in the second one, I don't remember the second game at all. I think Golem, yeah. Yeah, I'm also sorry to 378. I don't mean to highlight you like this. I mean, I'm sure he knows that, but 378 and IFM were actually similar in the sense that they both really loved. I think it was Cursed Body Slam Thunder Snorlax, if I remember correctly. Because I was like, why am I not EQing that Rhydon? Do I really need the para on it that bad? But then I was like, I think it might have been Cursed Thunder to have extra forms of paralysis and also a Cloister Lure, or an extra Cloister Lure. Yeah, so the IFM 378 thing, they were among the players most prominently known for spamming the standard Borat style. I think 378's first SPL game against Mystery, I think he ran just like the Vaporeon version of that team. I don't remember exactly, but I know he ran that a lot. IFM ran that a lot, as you saw earlier in this video. And the result was that both of them wound up having Jinx brought against them a lot. And as you saw earlier, but that's also a topic for the Jinx video. But the reason I mentioned it here is that Jinx came paired with Golem so much. So instead of Machamp or Vaporeon plus Steelix, it really became Jinx plus Golem. It was not that you had to use Jinx with Golem, but the more consistent Jinx teams were the ones with Golem, by and large. He really needed to have that spin. So yeah, a bunch of stuff happens. There's Jinx again. Oh, Snorlax blows up my Zapdos. I was a little sad I didn't go to Gengar or something there. But yeah, then Jinx again against the Zapdos. Hypnosis. Oh, look at that. Golem switching into Gengar. Cool. Yeah, to avoid Snorlax getting Dynamic Cruncher blown up on or something. Just the EQ to wear this down. And here's why Golem really loves Gengar alongside it. Because you prevent this thing from blowing up or toxicking or generally being annoying. So yeah, Golem, this is why those sample teams you saw, the new Big Five of GSC is Snorlax, Cloyster, Zapdos, Gengar, Golem. I mean, Gengar is not as essential, let's say, but Golem, I think, has eclipsed... Dude, where are my usage statistics? I swear, my some of the tabs I've had open have just been like randomly closed or something. But if I can't find them, I'll just look them up again manually. But yeah, Chrome has definitely been funny today. So yeah, the point being that those sample teams that you saw earlier, they are this new Big Five. And Jinx is obviously a big part of them, but you can also throw in a lot of other stuff there. Like Tyranitar is really good there too, because it helps with something like Exeggutor. And if you remove a ghost with it with Pursuit, then Golem has an even easier time, because you're no longer like, oh, do I want to? I don't want to get spun on, I don't want Gengar to pivot in on the spin and then pivot into something else in the EQ, or get Destiny bonded or HP watered or whatever. So T-Tar and Golem are a very good pair. Also, because, and I want to mention this because this is very underrated. I mean, the T-Tar Golem pair is really nice because if you put Roar on T-Tar, then you can use Fire Blast over Roar on Golem, because T-Tar is your normal resistant phaser, so you've got Snorlax covered in that, or Curselax covered in that way. And if you run Fire Blast on Golem, what's really nice about it is that you have a new weapon against Forretress, and Fire Blast hits Cloyster a lot harder than Earthquake. It does, in the mid-30s, I think, as opposed to that EQ you saw was like 27. So it's a significant damage increase, especially if it's poisoned. So if you want to just like, if you can fit Fire Blast, it's really good for Fori, for Cloyster, a little bit Exeggutor too, but also it gives you a new wall-breaking tool. So again, that whole thing, Skarmory can't switch into it, nothing else takes its boom, that's a free KO. And so I think that aspect of Golem is very underrated. But you do need it. I do specify it for that team, or for the T-Tar pairing, because T-Tar's got that a normal resistant Roar covered for you, and that's very important. But I did want to highlight that as a very underrated, excellent aspect of Golem's game. So there's Rhydon switching it. Yeah, here's a thing. I Ice Punched this on the switch. I forget what the exact reason I did this. I know Golem or Gengar is faster than Rhydon, even at -1. It gets the lefties first. But I think I switched in Golem here literally just to get the spin off. Yeah, no, I did. Just to be as safe as possible against the last Pokemon. Because I was like, you know what, Snorlax dealt with. I will use Golem just to spin here. And that will give me security in dealing with, whatever it is. So see, there's the spin, and there's the EQ, and now come back in, Ice Punch, and yeah. There's a crit. Ooh, yeesh. Yeah, and then it was Machamp, so probably not necessary, but I wanted to be safe because Jinx was asleep. So yeah, and then boom on the last turn. So yeah. So, but then that's not the end of it, because people are like, okay, that's interesting. And then in the World Cup Finals, then ABR, my teammate, is playing GSC. And he and I built this team together, which was Golem on Stall, and that had not been used. And the whole point is pretty much Stall teams will use. Remember earlier on Jimmy Turtwig's team, where it's like, oh, he has. Let me pull it up. He has he's got the Skarm and then also the Curse T-Tar. Well, earlier we mentioned Skarm is the EQ lax counter, right? But when Snorlax has Fire Blast, then you have to have something to answer it. And that's where your Ghost type comes in, or your Rock. It's pretty much Skarm plus Ghost or Rock, right? So Ghost, Gengar, Misdreavus, and Rock, Rhydon, Golem. Before it was, T-Tar, sorry. Before it was just T-Tar versus Rhydon on these teams. We were like, okay, well, what about Golem? Because it also spins, and thus you don't have as much pressure on Forretress or Cloyster as your Spiker. Oh, there's also another Thunder Snorlax to lure in, God, I love Thunder Snorlax. There's another Thunder Snorlax to bait in Cloyster and smack it for the benefit of Golem. And here we have a Cloyster instead of Forretress. But the idea being that if you've got Forretress, then you do not have as much pressure on it to spin, and you can dedicate it to the Spikes game. You can run Giga Drain, HP Fire, HP Ghost, Toxic, Protect, spin, boom, whatever, depending on your team. And it's not the end of the world if Fortress cannot get the spin off, because you've got Golem. And in addition to spinning, Golem performs because running Spiker plus spin is not a revolutionary idea in itself, because that's why Starmie gets used. But what Golem does is fill a defensive niche that Starmie can't, which is Firelax Answer. So instead of needing to run Starmie plus Firelax Answer, then you've got your Firelax Answer that also has that rapid spin pressure removal. So that's really big. And if you've got Cloyster, then Cloyster's whole thing is that Explosion and Rapid Spin are illegal on the same moveset. But if you have another Rapid Spinner, you can just freely run Explosion without needing to worry about it. Or feasibly, you run double Rapid Spin, because Spikes is a big deal, but, hey. So here's Golem coming in and threatening to spin. I think it gets a spin off. Yep, it gets the spin off. And Cloyster doesn't want to switch in because it's at 31 with low health. And yeah, so that's pretty much how this team functions. And it was really good. And there's obviously lots of options. And you're like, wait, what about there's no way that on a stall team you want to run EQ, spin, roar, boom all the time. Well, first of all, the cool thing about this team is that it is a stall team with 2 explosions, because it's got boom Cloyster and boom Golem, but it's also got the stall core of Golem and Skarmory, and the double dog core of Suicune and Raikou, which counters a lot. And I forget what the Snorlax set was. I don't think it was 3 boom stall. Not that it couldn't be used, but the whole point is that when you can rapid spin reliably, then you can you are more able to leverage your defensive core without needing to spam rest constantly. So you can have that more offensive edge while still having. You can have it both ways. One of my favorite expression in regards to team building is I try to have my cake and eat it too as much as possible. And here you can run a defensively apt team while still having the offensive threat of a mixed Snorlax and 2 explosions. So that's the idea anyway. What was this? Oh yeah, it was Flamethrower. Yeah, complete hazard control. So if Fori comes in, you destroy that, and then Golem has the spin, in the same way. So, yeah, there's double Cloyster, blah, blah, blah. There's Raikou, of course, doing Raikou things. This is not really that important, but yeah, now the spikes are permanently off, and it's just a matter of, yeah, there's a nice Thunder to avoid Rapid Spin. Oh, Light Screen plus Vaporeon, nice. I don't think this was, I forget if it was Rest or not. I don't think so. But yeah, avoiding Raikou getting surfed on the switch. Yeah, just roaring all around. Anyway, yeah, you also said, you might also have been thinking, okay, well, do you need to run Boom? And the answer is no. And you can have that long-term Firelax answer with Golem if you simply run EQ, Spin, Curse, Rest. Boom. Now you have the longevity against Snorlax, so you can just rest up, and there you go. And you can pair it with things like Blissey for Heal Bell if you like. But yeah, so if you don't want to run the more explode heavy version of this Golem stall team, then you will simply pair it with. You will simply run Curse Rest on it and be more secure that way if you want to take the game slower, like with Blissey and Misdreavus, as was also in the sample teams. So, yeah, Golem, awesome. That's pretty much it. Okay, so, yeah, I don't know what Chrome is doing, but it feels like it's closing my tabs without letting me know. I don't know what it is. Maybe they're... But yeah, so to conclude this video, I am going to go to the latest usage statistics to demonstrate that Golem is not just high in the viability ranking and high in the sample teams that were shown, but also it's getting used a lot. So, if you contrast it with its old usage and its old viability rankings thread and forget being on a sample, I mean, there weren't really sample teams back then, but, Borat Offense was the sample team. You go from all that, and now you have Golem in the most recent SPL. You can go back in the last couple of years, and Golem's already, reaching higher and higher levels of viability. You can go through these threads if you like. But you also have at number 7 in usage. Look at that, 31% Golem usage. That's crazy. That means you are really part of the metagame. look at these stables Golem is getting used more than. Well, getting used more than its rival. Steelix, of course, getting used more than Fori, Starmie, Skarmory, Exeggutor, Vaporeon, Machamp. Look at that. The old Borat Office trio. Eggy, Vaporeon, Machamp. Getting used more than all of them. Getting used more than Nidoking, Jinx. You know, these are like the most elite Pokemon. This top 16 in this little usage chart. Let me adjust the dimensions for those watching. Yeah, so under that, that's when you get more specific. But, you know, yeah, it is getting used more than these metagame staples. Isn't that absolutely nuts? So, yeah, that's from the Smogon Premier League. And if you want an even more recent example at the time of this video, I will go to the Smogon Classic and go to the usage statistics for this iteration of the tournament. And in GSC, again, Golem in the top 10, number 8, you know, behind Skarmory. So, or ahead of Skarmory, I should say. So yeah, that is Golem's little success story in GSC. Yeah, so thank you so much for watching / listening, and I will, yeah, I think that's pretty much it, I think. I will provide all the links shown in this video in the pinned comment. So thank you once again, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.